Well, I'm so excited to talk to you, Dave, about your new book, and I have a copy of it right here. And
Fantastic.
Raising Gen Alpha. And for my audience, just to let you know, as usual, we are giving away a copy of
Great.
Dave's book. You just have to enter the giveaway link on the show notes. But Dave, welcome to God's Size Story. Such an important book.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, and thank you for sharing the message of Gen Alpha because it is a really interesting topic. It's such a fascinating one, very personal to me and probably to many of your listeners as well.
Absolutely, yes, because a lot of so let's start from the beginning. So a lot of people are a little confused, right? We
Yeah.
hear Gen X, Gen Alpha. So can you just tell us like the timeline of Gen Alpha? When were these kids born?
Yeah. So Gen Alpha is children that are born from 2010 to 2024. So the church wider is mostly talking about Gen Z at the
Hmm.
moment. And
Yes.
and it seems to be the topic of the day. But Gen Alpha is already here. And it's that next generation.
Incredible.
And what's fascinated me was nobody's really talking about this emerging generation. So we're almost 15 years behind having that conversation about Gen Z, who was
Yeah.
sort of, 1995 to sort of like 2000 and,
Nine,
and 10. And then
10.
for me, having Gen Alpha as a focus is just so exciting because this generation is not only coming, they're already here, right?
Yeah, exactly. They are here, and it's funny. And I think that one of the reasons is because we really never had to get on with the program of generations and how they behave. It seems
Yeah.
like this is a fairly new thing. It's almost like in the past you would look back and talk about like my generation, Generation X. You know, you'd like I didn't hear about my generation until I was already an adult, right? But now it seems like there are so many changes that are impacting these younger generations that we need to see what's going on. Like we need to see that there are certain traits that are common, and because it's a generation that's being impacted by social media, so in
Yeah.
such an incredible, and now AI as well, which you addressed that in your book. So we need to talk about it, especially as parents, educators, and educators, and family in general, friends. Well, so would you share a little bit about your personal background in working with Gen Alpha?
Yeah. So I've been working with teenagers since I was a teenager myself. And I always feel like my wife and I, we say that our life mission is basically to empower the next generation. And it's always been about how do we serve and equip those that have like coming after us. So my day job is I lead a charity here in England called Grace Foundation, which is a schools-based charity. So we work in secular schools, helping bring Christian values and ethos to young people who've got no faith background whatsoever. So most of my days are spent working with 17,500 young people across 15
Wow.
schools. So I have a fairly good knowledge and understanding of what's going on with the next generation. Well, I thought I did until you start to look into this whole generational thing. So having done youth work myself and having worked in schools, felt like I had a pretty good understanding. I also am a parent of 4 children, 3 Gen Z children and 1 Gen Alpha. And it was really my Gen Alpha who, a conversation with her when she was 12 years old. And I said to her, her name's Sienna, I said, Sienna, why do you think that adults struggle to connect with the next generation? And she just floored me when she said, Dad, you just simply didn't grow up in the same world that we did.
Very true.
And I thought, well, with the wisdom of a 12-year-old, like, we think that we know what's going on with the next generation, even when you work with them. But the reality is, until you put yourself in their shoes and really look under the surface, we think like I use social media, you maybe use social media in a certain
Mhm.
way. We're all part of that same screen generation. So we have many of the same aspects, but Gen Alpha particularly were born into the social media world. They were born into the internet age. We migrated into it. And depending on
Hmm.
where you were born, this generational thinking then determines how you see the world. And it is like that pair of glasses, that Gen Alpha lens. So my background is from working in education, working in teenagers, particularly have a strong heart for mission, really helping young people who've got no faith in Jesus actually find faith and understanding, because my faith is so important to me, to find a sense of hope, identity, and purpose. And I've been doing that for, like I said, since I was a teenager myself. So for at least 30 years, without going into how old I am. So that's a bit of my background.
Wow, that's great. And you're coming. You say it's very true that we really don't know. I don't have any Gen Alpha kids. I have two Gen Z kids, and so, but I do see a difference. Because of course I'm around kids. I was a volleyball coach for many years, and so I did have some Gen Alpha kids as well, and there is a huge difference that I'm noticing. And so tell us, in your experience and in your research for this book, what stands out to you as a huge difference between even Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
So in some ways, Gen Z started a lot of the trends that I'll talk about, but Gen Alpha have been fully immersed into them. So there's really the research that I did for the book, and also from my own understanding and trying to sort of bring together the thinking and research, was that there's 5 main traits, and we can unpack any of these in any way you want. One is that Gen Alpha are anxious minded. So we've got 1 in 5 Gen Alpha children having a potential identifiable mental health challenge. So that's 5 kids in every classroom. And unfortunately, it's the defining trait of this generation is mental health and the challenges they face around that, which we all see. And I talk to parents every single day who have challenges with their own kids, and we see anxious mindedness is just infiltrating society more than ever. The second one is that they're leading influencers. They want to make a difference. This is a generation like their older peers that want to make a difference. You've got 2/3 of Gen Alpha kids who are saying that they want to buy from brands that make a difference in the world. These are a caring citizen society. But then they're also very conflicted as well with some of that, because they've seen their Gen Z peers go after change in the world, and what's happened? Maybe things have got better. Sometimes things have got worse. So there's a bit of what's interesting is whereas Gen Z really sort of were saying that we're going to change the world, Gen Alpha want to change the world, but they're pointing the finger back at you and me. And they're saying to brands, they're saying to businesses, they're saying to institutions like the church, you guys need to be making a difference, so we're going to hold you to account for that. So that's the L. The next one is pandemic impacted. So we have a cultural milestone in the middle of this generation, which was the pandemic. And it's interesting, 6 years on now, right? And I'm amazed at how quickly it's gone, but also how nobody really talks about the pandemic in England. I don't know what it's like for you there, but we've so quickly as adults buried it under the carpet and tried to move on. Yet this was a generation born in the middle of it. And you've got 84% of parents who believe that COVID is going to have a lasting impact on this generation. So much so that the researchers almost called this generation COVID, which I thought was really interesting. They always call it Gen C. Because it's life before COVID, life after. And then the H is hyperconnected. So we have a generation who are, we call them screen agers around here. They are going to lead 100% digital world and have been born fully into it. We migrated into the digital space. They were born swimming in it.
Yes.
They've never known a life beyond screens. And of course, the pandemic accentuated that even more. So all these are connected. And really the last characteristic of Gen Alpha is being AI shaped. It's the A, it's the AI shaped.
That's brand new. That's brand new.
This is the new one, and this is the one that's blowing my mind, and I'm sure blows your mind as well. So one of the stats says that 65% of Gen Alpha kids will work in jobs that don't yet exist. So it's not just that these are jobs that are, these jobs do not yet exist, that they've not yet been invented. So there's huge questions for us as adults and educators and parents and ministers. Are we raising children for a world that no longer exists? And that's really, when we're talking about generational thinking, it's why we've got to put ourselves in their shoes, because we have to see what does it look like for this next generation. So those 5 traits together, they spell the word alpha, which helps us. So we've got anxious minded, leading influencers, pandemic impacted, hyper connected, AI shaped. That they're probably the 5 traits which really define this next generation. And you'll notice some that you and I can relate to, but it's the immersiveness and the extremeness that young people are facing, particularly around anxiety, for example.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how that resonates with your understanding, Patricia, and
Yes.
what you feel as well.
Yes, David, I'm telling you, one of the things that I think is so important is because you just said it, like with us, our generation, we kind of like grew
Yeah.
together with with some of these things that they are exposed to from when they are born. Like it was 2012 when Facebook, I think,
Yeah.
launched. Social media. That was the first one that I remember. Anyway, and it's like so we were already adults and we are getting into this and growing with it.
Yeah.
Now they are growing already like hello, I'm learning how to look at a screen and I'm already having to connect with people and what have you. And it's just a completely different world. And I think it was very important. The importance of this book to me is because without understanding, we are going to be foolish on how to
Right.
deal. We're going to be putting labels on kids that actually need to be understood,
Yeah.
right? And they need our help. And then we need help to actually understand better this world that they're in. Instead of just simply criticizing, oh, just put away your screen. Why are you on your screen all the time?
Right.
Like we have to understand, and you bring to light a lot of that. We have to remember they didn't grow into it; they were born into it, and that
And
is a huge
that's
difference.
so different, isn't it? It's interesting you mentioned about judgment because we tend to judge people that are different than us, don't we? Like so we're
Yeah.
very quick. So there's that age old thing that every generation thinks they're wiser than the one that came before them, So
Right.
and every generation before it is judging the one that comes after them. So we've got this disconnection, and it's interesting. Like one of my favorite Bible verses is, "One generation will tell of your deeds to another." So the story of God is being told, right, from generation to generation. God's a multi-generational God. So actually, if you wanted to disrupt the flow of what's going on in the world, what God wants to do is, if you actually interrupt the storytelling from one generation to the next, you can really make a dent and cause massive distraction and disruption. And actually, if we're honest, that's probably what's happening right now in society. There's so much division, there's so much judgment, there's not a lot of compassion, and there's not a lot of understanding and putting ourselves in those our kids' shoes. So the thing that you mentioned there about we're so quick to say, well, just get over it or sort yourself out. And like anxiety is that key thing where parents will often say, well, I had to go to school when I was a child. What's your problem? Why are you being so anxious about going to school? But I tell you now, and like I this is the world I live in. Schools are very different places to what we grew up in. Very
Can
different.
imagine.
And friendships are very different to what we had to deal with. I mean, I can remember having 4 or 5 friends that you would actually go out and play with. Then you'd go home riding on your bikes anywhere outside. You'd then go home and you'd leave them and you wouldn't see them again until 2, 3 days later.
Yeah.
Well, now because of these mobile phones, this generation is online all the time. They're connected to friends and it's not always in a good way, right? You can't escape it.
No.
So there's no boundaries, there's no escape from the constant connectivity. And that's one of the examples that you can use in terms of thinking of actually this world these kids have grown up in is so different to ours. And their interpretation of things like school is just not the same,
No.
especially post pandemic.
I cannot imagine. My girls are older. They are 23 and almost 20. And I already see, I mean, they just graduated from school, right? And I already see a huge difference just years, just a handful of years later, how kids are being educated right now. You talked about the influence of AI,
Yeah.
right? I mean, nowadays, the kids are going to AI to do their homework. I mean, this is like,
Yeah.
it's huge things. I mean, this is a huge Can you imagine us like back in when we were in school, like say, you know,
I wish.
oh my God, I know, right? Hey, write this essay for me. I'm like, goodness. Let me ask you, are parents supposed to be concerned for that with the kids? And in this book, do you help parents with practical tools on how to help them navigate this AI infested world?
I think there's two sides to it, as with every technology, right? So there's an element where in the book I talk about being poised for possibility. So what's happening is there's so much possibility being opened up with AI. Like I genuinely believe that we're about to see medical breakthroughs. I think we're already seeing them. I genuinely believe that the world's going to get smarter and more interesting and exciting in technology, and that our kids are going to grow up into that. So there's a real positive side that we can't deny really, and things will get easier in terms of smart tech and particularly in the worlds of scientific breakthroughs, etc. Fantastic. So we can't deny that. However, I talk in the book about being either tech avoidant or tech wise, and we've got to teach our kids to be tech wise. Yeah. So one of the things that I find with parents is that they don't understand AI and they don't take the time to understand it. So they bury their heads in the digital sand. And one of the things I first advocate for in the book is say, you've got to get a hold of this as much as you can. I don't mean you're never going to become a tech expert, but you need to become tech wise. And it's the key things is that understanding that now in the palm of our kids' hands is this artificial intelligence tools where they're given godlike tools, really, where they can speak a word and it can create. I can say, make me a book about any
Yeah,
topic in the world.
crazy.
Make me a picture, make me a video, make me a video game. So I'm given the power to speak. I mean, doesn't that sound almost biblical in its nature?
Yeah, it's
And we're
scary.
given this creative power, but it's bigger than what we as humans were meant to handle, I think.
Hmm.
So unless we can learn to discern how do you handle this technology, because there's a huge element where just because you can use it doesn't mean you should. So, for
Hmm.
example, with the hey, just use the technology to write an essay for school, you'll save yourself hours. Are you learning anything when you do that? Is that something that's going to be beneficial to you in the short term? Is there consequences to that? So we have to teach our kids now that they have probably more power in their hands than we have ever had. So we have to teach them how do you use that power wisely. And the other thing is that we have to learn. Yes, we're poised for technology, poised for possibility, but also we are being discipled by the data. Like our young
Hmm.
people are being trained and influenced by the algorithm more than ever. So one of the things that I talk about in the book and would advocate with parents is we have to teach young people that things like chatbots and AI, they're great tools, but they don't really know you.
Yes.
And they can never really be replacements for intimacy. What was fascinating for me was when you look at the research, tools like ChatGPT in 2024, the predominant use was for productivity. So when they first sort of took off, everybody was going, I'm going to make my life easier. Write me an email, make me a timetable, make life easy. By 2025, the number one use was companionship. So there's been a shift in
Really?
adults from productivity to companionship. So we've now got a situation where adults, and of course teens and young people are following, they're trying to find what they feel is missing in society
Hmm.
through this technology. So they're
Hmm.
actually looking for intimacy, but it's always going to be artificial. It's in the name, right?
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So I think one of the biggest things we can do is have conversations with our kids about this technology and say, you do realize that that's not real, right?
Hmm.
Because there's something called character.ai where kids can go on and they can actually create any character from history, like past, present, or future, and talk to it as if it's real. And young people are befriending these.
Oh
And
yeah.
this is, and particularly in the States, this is a massive thing. There's
Massive.
thousands
Yes.
and thousands of Gen
Yes.
Alpha kids going on
Hmm.
these tools and using them. And they're loving them because they're getting friendship which maybe they don't have in school, or maybe adults aren't talking to them. So they're then
Hmm.
finding relationship and friendship and intimacy. So what can we do to combat this? Well, first of all, be aware, be tech wise, know this technology exists. Secondly, find ways of creating in real life conversation and connection with your young person, because people are gathering around digital spaces, but we need to remember that a chatbot can never replace a genuine conversation. A chatbot doesn't
Yes.
really know you. I always say, I joke about chat GPT. I joke about it that basically like chat GPT doesn't know me. It knows what I search for. It knows like what I'm interested in. It can tell me all that. But I
Yes.
tell you what, it doesn't know. It doesn't know that I'm terrible at the washing up at home, because I've never told the internet that how bad I am at household chores.
Yes.
Now, my wife, on the other hand, she knows me
Yes.
because she lives with me in real life. And I think reminding children that intimacy can never be manufactured, it always has to be expressed through real relationships, is so important. And when we see those red flags around kids getting more drawn into technology than real relationship, that's when we need to have a conversation. And it's very simple with all these things: is their world getting smaller or bigger?
Mm.
You know, like have we given these kids like, you know, godlike tools, but they haven't in childlike minds? You know, of course they're going to
Yes.
need some help to support and navigate through. The other really key thing in AI is to understand that we have to learn to discern what's real and what's not. So no
Mm.
longer can we just take anything as read. So
Absolutely.
wisdom, teaching our children wisdom. Again, you cannot get wisdom, I don't believe, from a chatbot. I think you can have information,
That's right.
but
You're
you
just
can't get
spilling
wisdom.
information.
And this is where parents have that role of like, we know our children. So what's beautiful is the number one influence in a Gen Alpha kid's life, all the research says, is a parent.
Mm.
Number one. So
That's wonderful.
we feel like we've lost our kids, right? We feel like we've lost them to
Yes.
tech, lost them to screens. That's not true.
Mm.
What's true is that they're looking to you as that primary relationship when it comes to deciding what's right and wrong. Who you are and that relationship connection you have is so key.
Yeah.
And also, there's a challenge in there as well, because I know, for example, my tech habits are not always great. And my
Right.
15-year-old, my 70-year-old, they're watching me
They'll call you out
and they
100%.
will call me out. They
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, next generation long for authenticity. And they will
Yes.
actually, they don't care. They'll say, well, Dad, you don't do that.
No. Hmm. That's
So,
exact.
you know, my kids read the
Gen
book.
Z is like that
Yeah,
as well. Hmm. For
exactly. It's
sure.
the extension of Gen Z. So they take this stuff and they read it and they go, well, Dad, you're not like that. So that's
Mm.
why even in the book I talk about like modeling your own habits and dealing with this stuff
Yes.
yourself. So it's so funny because you start to think about how we can serve the next generation. You end up thinking about yourself, right? We end up
Right.
thinking that we have to be the people that I've got to get hold of my anxiety. I've got to get hold of my hyperconnectivity and understand my screen use and understand AI for myself. And then I'm
Absolutely.
empowered and equipped to help the next generation.
Very true. And one of the things that I have that kind of experience with my daughters is every time that I just tell them, just don't do that. You're doing too much of this or the other. It doesn't resonate with them, and
Yeah.
I think it's usually you have to say, like, listen, I understand because I struggle with this or I struggle with that. Whenever you relate, you can relate to their problems, or the questions that they have. That's the only time that I believe that they truly listen to you is when you relate to them. And that's not being buddy buddy and not being, they want you to parent them. Every child wants you to parent them. But it's just we are now dealing with the two generations. I believe that Gen Z is like that as well. You said it all. They want authenticity. They do
Yeah.
not. They do not want you to just come. There's the because I said so doesn't work with this generation.
It doesn't work.
It
No, it
doesn't
doesn't
work with
work.
them. And so that was my mama used to tell that to me. Because I just said so. You do it. Well, it doesn't work with them. Not if you want to reach them, reach their hearts, and truly make a difference in their lives, right? But one question that I have here in my mind is because, if you think about, I'm just thinking about me parenting my kids.
Yeah.
There are times in certain phases, especially teenage years, especially, where what you say is always they always see that with like, I don't know about that. Or they sometimes they just don't want to listen to you, period. So with that in mind, what do you see that schools, that the educators are doing to understand and to help? Because I'm just thinking in one example is, for example, that uh, universities or high schools are saying, do not use uh, AI for
Yeah.
your for this composition. We have tools that will show us that you used AI, and we know that there are such things. And so, like, but that's kind of like the because I said so
Mm.
deal. So
Yeah.
because the kids are listening to sometimes other people other than their parents, or learning from them. What do you see in the world right now with educators? Are things changing? Are they trying to actually teach these people how to use these tools?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, to say they're scrapping to catch up like the rest of us, right? And
Mhm.
there is a real concern that the education system already needed reforming before all this kicked in, right? In many ways, I don't know what it's like there, but in England, the education system has largely been the same for 30 years. In fact, when my son did his exams, he did Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, the book. And that was the same book that I did for my exams in English. I actually pulled it off the shelf and gave it to the same copy. I said, you might as well use my notes. So
Wow.
this was 30 years later, still the same. Now, I'm not knocking Charles Dickens, or my wife would be very cross, but there's been a need for reform. Um, and in that reform, what schools are trying to do is to catch up with, like, how do we teach children the tools about understanding social media, understanding relationships, understanding artificial intelligence and what's behind it. And actually, a lot of my work with my team in schools is built around how do we help children navigate this idea that they see no distinction between the online and offline world. So when they talk about relationships and friendships, they'll say, I had a conversation with XYZ, and they meant text, or they meant Instagram direct messaging, DMing.
Yeah.
They don't mean, God forbid, a phone call. They don't mean face to face. They mean online. I was talking with a pastoral leader yesterday in one of our schools, and she said to me, Dave, I wish that social media didn't exist, because I have so many problems that we have to deal with on
Yeah.
a relationship, bullying, all sorts of indecent images, etc., etc. It's all to do with social media. So schools are trying to, number one, put better education in place for the staff as well as the students, because a lot of the staff don't understand the tools that are out there. And
Hmm.
number two, try to create environments within schools where actually they're going screen free, they're going phone free. Here in the UK, the government are about to push through a big ban on phones in schools, which will be really interesting to see.
Yeah.
And I've known schools that have done that I work with, where within 6 months, the culture is a lot better. It's
Absolutely.
fascinating, because they're
Hmm.
saying when you're here between 8 in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you are phone free. And
Hmm.
they see a reduction in bullying, a reduction in kind of relationship issues. They see loads of things. And do you know who kicks against it the most? The parents, because the parents are saying, I want to be able to get hold of my little Johnny or little
Wow.
Vanessa. So there's this, the last part of this, obviously, education for the students, creating the right culture. But the last part is education for the parents. And schools are increasingly seeing themselves as the place where they have to educate parents with this.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work with my team is actually getting a whole one-to-one with parents and saying, you do realize this is going on for your child, don't you? And they're totally clueless. I mean, one of the stats which was fascinating I found for the book was 9 out of 10 teachers report children coming into school and not being able to use a book. I don't mean read a book, I mean use a book. So they're trying to swipe the book and tap the
Yeah.
book.
Wow.
And this is what we've got coming through from the very young age
Oh
because of the
yeah.
pandemic and
And
screen use. So these
and
little Gen Alpha kids, they've never read a book.
exactly. Well, not to mention that they can upload it to Chat GPT and say, "Hey, summarize these chapters for me.
Yeah.
Tell me about this book." I mean,
So
it's crazy. It's a
so
total
why do they
different
need to read?
world.
Yeah. So so schools are trying to catch up and they're trying to put these things in place. And I actually, as an aside, I think the church is needs to be thinking about these things too, right?
Yes, I
You know,
wanted
they
to ask
really,
you that.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's another big question. Now, tell me, like, what is the church doing? Want to understand, but also I'm curious in your research, how are these children? How's Gen Alpha viewing the church?
yeah. So the best way to describe it is it's almost like you've got snow that's not been trodden in, and there's nothing there. So we've got an opportunity with the next generation to make a fresh imprint and to really change things, because most of these kids have no understanding of faith, have no understanding or background of church, and almost Gen Z did a lot, and Gen actually millennials did a huge amount of deconstruction. So you've
Yes,
probably talked on your podcast with people about deconstruction. Well,
for
Gen
sure.
Alpha, they've got nothing to deconstruct from. So we are constructing from scratch here. So it's almost like it's gone full circle. So one of the exciting opportunities for the church is we've got a generation who are spiritually curious. They are more open to faith. They would come to church if somebody invited them, but they're probably not going to explore on their own necessarily. So it's huge opportunities for the church to engage with the spiritual curiosity. We're seeing that in our work. Like, honestly, I could tell you story after story of young people picking up the Bible for themselves, learning how to pray, becoming excited about faith, which is I've never seen anything like it. So these are fantastic days for spiritual
Yes.
curiosity. What does the church need to do? You know, there's an amazing story that Jesus tells in the Bible where he goes into the temple, right, and he clears the temple, and he gets rid of all the religious mess. And
Mm-hmm.
and what happens when he gets rid of all the sellers and the religious people who are just trying to mess up God's church and make it about themselves? He makes room for children to come in. He
Yes, I
makes room for the
do.
next generation. And I think there's such a beautiful opportunity, because Jesus is such good news for Generation Alpha,
Yeah.
for the church to make room for children and to make room for the next generation. And I don't even think it means that you have to have lights and entertaining and be really excitable, and everybody have yellow t-shirts and bouncing up and down and spend thousands of dollars. I think it's about making space for multi-generational connection. I think it's about the grandparent connecting with the child and feeling confident to connect. I think it's about
Absolutely.
church talking about mental health more. I think it's about church getting involved in social justice more, so this generation see them as being valid. I think it's about acknowledging that we can talk about, when was the last time you heard a church sermon about social media? I mean, hardly ever. People don't talk about it even in church,
Yeah.
and being relevant to that generation, but not necessarily changing everything, because we don't need just a church for Generation Alpha. We need a church for every generation, right?
Yes.
Because so we can
Yes.
tell the story of God to the next. And one of the most beautiful things is that I was reminded through this book was that Jesus is good news.
Mm-hmm.
And for the anxious minded, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, right?
Yes, that's
For
right.
the leading influencer, he's the God of justice. He's the one who wants to make a difference. For the pandemic impacted, he's Emmanuel, God with us. For the hyper
Mm-hmm.
connected, he's the one true connection. He's our vine. He's the one that we can really connect with. And for the AI shaped, Jesus is our true source of wisdom. And I think
Yes.
that's such a beautiful message for the church to get a hold of, and to remind this next generation that Jesus is for them and with them and wants to make room for
Mm-hmm.
them.
I love that. And you know, if you think about all the challenges that this generation is presenting, it is just a field, an open field for the
Mm,
gospel to
it is
make a difference. And I love it. I did not know that, what you said, that they are very, you know, this generation is very open to the
very open.
gospel. And you said it all, I think, because the generations before kind of deconstructed, you know, the whole faith thing. They're just, and then the parents probably, a lot of Gen Alpha parents are the millennials, right? Who are who pretty much have many great numbers walked away from the faith, and so now you're having a generation that can find the peace and and the wisdom of God and all of those things, and
Mm.
they're just waiting for us to tell the story and to invite them in.
You've nailed it there. That's exactly it. Is they need us to tell the story. I think one of the challenges to the church, I would say, is don't assume that children and the next generation know the stories, that they
Mm-hmm.
understand the Bible. That when I say church, I have a view in my head of what that means. Just like we said about school earlier, right? Like there's a difference between generations. When we say church to the next generation, are we willing to understand what it is from their perspective? Because they may not necessarily see it as relevant, and
Yeah.
they might see it's just an institution. But I tell you what, they're interested in the story and they want to know more. So are we willing to tell them and not just assume they already know it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important, because you have to invite them in, and especially anytime that we see anxiety, fear, depression, and you see all the loneliness that
Mm.
comes with all the
Yeah.
social issues that are there. When you have all this, it's just a beautiful field for the gospel to transform, because that's what the power of the gospel, power of Jesus Christ, is, to transform lives, and He wants to transform the lives of every generation, right? And so,
Absolutely. And I love
but
the
it,
boldness I've seen with my own 15-year-old. She's so bold in her faith,
oh,
and they
it's
just
beautiful.
they're just so open and ready. So it's exciting times for us in the midst of the challenges, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, let me ask you this. What are some of the tools that you offer for parents inside this book, so that um, they know that they can find help?
So I think when it comes to anxiety, there's some real tools in there. There's that reminder that kids are mind, body, and spirit. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some real tools in there around how you can renew your mind. How can we help children actually reframe their thinking and actually test some of their emotions and ask, is that real? And then also that reminder to move their bodies, because these are real human
So
beings,
important.
and we need
Mm-hmm.
to re-embody the next generation, remind them, their kids, that they need to move and eat well and all those kind of things, but also to feed the spirit and to fill them with the right things in terms of prayer and support. So when it comes to anxiety, there's so many tools in there, and very practical as well. I think when it comes to the hyperconnectivity, there's many books which talk about, oh well, you need to reduce screen time, you need to put on sort of like controls for your kids so that you can
Mm-hmm.
see what they're seeing. All of that is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important, but at the end of the day, for me, it's how do we help children discover their identity, because we've got an algorithm that's trying to teach them their identity, social media trying to teach them who they are. How do we as parents, and the book will help give you the tools to do that, how do we help them discover their identity, find their purpose, and find a place of belonging? Because
Mm-hmm.
actually, the reason why social media is so addictive and the reason why people get lost in this internet world is because they're trying, everybody's searching, and I don't just mean Googling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's searching for identity, purpose,
Yes.
and belonging. And the book really helps remind us as parents, educators, those working with the next generation, that yes, we need to put in the practical tools. Yes, you might need some limits on your screen time so that your child doesn't have an iPad till midnight, with
Yes.
unfettered access. Absolutely do all that.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, how do we have conversations with children that help them understand who they are, that see that you are more than what social media says about you? You are more
Mm-hmm.
than that sense of like, going after likes, going after follows.
Yes.
Your identity is not built in your performance and your virality online. Your
Mm-hmm.
identity is built in the fact that you're a child of God and that you're
That's right.
loved by God and you're loved by your family too. And it really reminds us to have those in real life experiences with children. So remember, get outside. Remember, have family meal tables, like get round the meal table. And in one sense, these are age old things, right? These are the things that they've always worked for every generation, but they're so important for this next generation because as the world increasingly becomes more artificial, we have to become more human. And I think parents have to remind their children that, hey, we are humans. and we're going to help you become more human, because we are just on the edge of, it's already here, as you know, a world where we're going to have people falling in love with robots. It's already happening
Yes, it's
for us.
already here.
And as soon as the physical robots come and walk amongst us, which I know at the moment sounds crazy, but it's coming.
It is.
We're going to have another sea change in terms of the technology trying to take over intimacy and replace the human heart and connection. And we've got to rage against that. You know, we've got to, as parents, rage against the dying of humanity, and actually stand up for intimacy and stand up for relationship. As a Christian, I believe that's our God-given mandate, actually, is to reconnect people with their mind, body, and spirit. So the book will really help you with the hyperconnectivity, and then it even gives you practical tools around AI, like how do we help kids discern what's real and what's not. And when I first wrote the book on AI, some of the stuff is crazy, right? And you think, gosh, this seems like we're in some sort of distant future, but it's happening, and it's happening now.
Yeah, and probably 5 years from now, it's going to be obsolete. You're going to have to write something like an edited or edition, you know, or updated edition, because things are evolving so fast.
They're moving so fast, but what's good about it is it teaches you the principles, so that the tools will change. We're only going one way towards, you know, you will at the touch of a button be able to create movies that are just like 2 hours long, that rival blockbusters, just from on your laptop at home or on your mobile phone. All of this is coming. It's already here. So the book really helps remind us that we have to help kids learn to discern what's real, what's not, weigh the source, and reminds us as well to focus on what's real and actually develop the skills that are needed to become more human. Because I think, you know, this whole idea that Gen Alpha are going to work in jobs that don't exist, I think the jobs that are coming are going to be, yes, they'll be tech driven, but we're going to have a need for confident, resilient leaders. We need children to be raised in a generation where they can actually be more human, where they can really build real relationships and know how to understand people and talk to people and maybe make a phone call, you know, the thing which Gen Alpha just hate to do. And actually, we don't need another generation who can just send another text. We need kids who can actually define and shape conversation and shape culture. And as parents, I genuinely believe that we still live in days where we can confidently do that, because we're the number one influence, right? So with our faith and with our what we want to do, we can help shape this. So the book, on every of those 5 areas, it just gives you tools, and it just helps you understand what's going on for them, so you can put yourself in their shoes and hopefully lead them and love and lead them well.
Listen, I love what you have done. I think that this is such an important book. Anybody who has who, you know, if you are a teacher or a parent or a grandparent or uncle or aunt or whatever, if you are around kids from this generation, it's a great tool for you to learn. Listen, we need to be empowered by the Lord, but also by information, yes, because they are going to get this information, and it's time that we are not going to be able to influence them if we don't understand them, because I said so does not work anymore. And so we need to, you know, we need to still parent. We still need, like you said, to put limits, you know, because without those limits, then we really cannot help them, right? But at the same time, we need to understand how they think. And it is such a different world from when you and I grew up. And if we do not deliberately seek the knowledge and the understanding, we are not going to be able to help them. We're just not going to be able to help them effectively. And they are dealing with things that we didn't deal with as children, with, you know, massive depression, massive anxiety, meaning in massive scales, right? I interview a lot of different, like, psychologists and different things.
Yes.
It's a pandemic. They are calling it an epidemic. Sorry,
it is.
They're calling it an epidemic among the younger kids, especially depression, no, especially anxiety. And so we need, if we love them, which we do, we need to be empowered. And I love that you put this together, Dave. Do you want to say anything else about this book or about Grace Foundation that we would like to know. I think most of my audience is in the United States, but I'm hoping that you are going to bring me some British folks listening to my podcast.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring all the Brits. Yeah.
Bring the Brits.
Yeah. I think, just to give a word of encouragement to parents, to say that you are the best parent for your child. And what a beautiful reminder, because
I
there is,
love that.
we just did a parenting course with our church based on this Gen Alpha material. And I had a parent come up to me and he said he was terrified of what was going on for his own child, like terrified. So living in fear that he wasn't able to think with faith. And I think my encouragement is to parents that you're the best parent for your child. And actually, hopefully, through this book, and just be encouraged, even if you don't read the book, be encouraged that God's hope and plan is that parents can influence their children in a positive way, and
Yes,
build and there's still hope for the future, right? I
absolutely.
think in terms of Grace Foundation, we're in a really privileged position in this country to be able to kind of share some real faith-based nuggets of wisdom. And we're probably on the cutting edge of what's going on with the next generation. And I would say, yes, there's great challenge, but also there's great hope as well there. And never be, if you're a church leader, if you're a minister, somebody that's leading, educating the next generation, I think it's very easy for us to go with our agenda and say, you need to do this, you need to do that to the next generation. But we have to remember what they're going through. And when we put ourselves in their shoes and we see life through their lens, that really helps reframe things for me and really helps me understand that this is an amazing generation, but it's also an anxious generation. This
Yes.
is a wonderful generation, but it's also a generation that still needs us. And my encouragement would be to be there for the next generation and to never ever forget or never give up that your role is so important. And yeah, I hope that kind of summarizes my
It
heart,
sure
not just
does.
the heart of the book, but just my heart for parents. Like I'm a
Absolutely.
parent myself, and how tough it is, but keep going for it because there's hope for the future.
Absolutely. Well, I love that. Well, Dave, thank you so much for putting this together. What a great tool for parents, educators, and anyone who has any type of influence over this next generation. And I thank you for this time. And everyone, just go to my show notes. There'll be all the links to connect with Dave, with Grace Foundation, and also to purchase this book. And one person is gonna win a book who just entered the giveaway. So thank you so much, Dave, for your time.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.